Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube and you see a little link down below, you can click on that and you'll end up in Zoom. Once you get to Zoom, you click on that little link and you'll end up in Mukana. And that's where you become a producer of the show. You actually run the show. We cover what you ask and what you vote on. So please join us there and become part of the producer group. If you think you can answer some of the questions, you just need to get here a little earlier, 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's where we do our mic checks, and we just want to make sure everybody's ready to go. If you are not sure if you're ready to do this or not, you need to do check your system. You can come in as early as 6 o'clock a.m. and Pacific Standard Time and check that, or just hang out with us. I can't promise the content. We just kind of sit and chit chat, waiting for people like you to come in and see if your system is ready to roll. First hour is open game. Anything about media or virtual production, you can ask there. We have a very wide range of questions that come in and a great panel. There's a half a millennia of experience here, so it's a really great place to ask questions. The second hour is usually something we've decided to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about audio plugins and filters, stuff that we use on a day-to-day basis, and just talk about which ones we like. There's so many, so many to choose from. So we'll talk a little bit about the ones that we keep on going back to. Tomorrow, we're still going to have another extended Q&A for 2 hours. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about Keynote. I had promised this a while ago, and it was brought up to me that I hadn't fulfilled that promise. So we'll talk a little bit about Keynote and how I use it at least. But we'll all just kind of cross and talk through some of the ways to get the most out of it. I actually use it. You're going to see a video by next week that is all done in Keynote. So I've decided to start making a lot of my YouTube videos with Keynote just as a test of how far we can kind of push it. So we'll show some of that in progress on Thursday. Friday is we're going to have the folks from Monogram. Monogram is they build custom hardware that ties into a variety of our software, and so we're gonna show how that actually works. And Thursday, Saturday, we have, of course, the education second hour. Emily, by the way, Emily Russo is taking over as host for the education hours. So she'll be the permanent host for the Saturday sessions, and we're pretty excited about that. I wanted to make sure I didn't put her on the spot, so I asked her. So she's accepted that, and I think she's been doing a great job. And you're going to see a lot. We're going to kind of keep. We saw a lot of different hosts last week. We're going to not do it quite so much that way, but we are definitely going to start adding more hosts for different hours, and so stay tuned for that. All right, let's jump into the questions.
Okay, we start with Ari Block of Tel Aviv, Israel, and Ari is in a situation where both remote contributor and production center are behind NATed networks without the ability to open ports for port forwarding to facilitate things like RTMP and SRT. What options exist for getting remote feeds into the studio?
Go ahead, Stuart.
I'm going to give you the easy one, which is set up a laptop with a HDMI output and its own internet connection that is completely separate from your in-house network. And then you're only running a HDMI connection into your production system. So that it's basically air-gapped from your network, and bring it in that way.
Go ahead,
Just
Jeff.
play it full screen.
This is a big question. And Ari, I believe we've talked about this a little bit, but definitely Sienna Processing Engine would be an option for this because it's not actually port dependent. NDI Cloud is another by Sienna. The MediaLux guys also will transverse NATed networks. And Bird Dog Cloud, I believe, is now working across NATed networks also. But you have to drop down to WebRTC quality versus SRT, which is a little bit more stable than the WebRTC.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Jeff, how many of those solutions were RTMP, SRT? I thought they were all NDI solutions there.
No, each one of those are, well, Bird Dog is SRT or WebRTC. The MediaLux is SRT or WebRTC, and Sienna is its own proprietary. So it's not actually, it is NDI inside the facility, but is not actually on that. And he wasn't actually asking for RTMP necessarily. So RTMP and SRT are two separate things altogether.
Next question.
Comes to us from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. And Rupert says, does the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, often called by its initial SMPTE, have relevance in the online and live streaming spaces other than being effective in the evolution of 2110?
Go ahead, Aaron.
They define all of the standards that you're using right now. So yeah, they're relevant.
Massively relevant. I mean, they're a big, and we're going to try to build a closer relationship with SMPTE as we move forward. I know some folks over there, and we're going to try to get them on as guests to talk about maybe even some of the stuff that they do. They do whole courses too that are pretty good that you can sign up for, weekly courses on. I'm going to be taking some this fall on a variety of subjects, and so it's hugely impactful over everything that we do. Yeah, absolutely. Courtney?
Yeah, as a 40-year member of SMPTE, I can tell you there are standards committees that you can join and contribute to remotely. And of course, if you're in a large town, there are local chapters of SMPTE in a lot of the large towns around, and attend a meeting in your neighborhood.
Yeah, and so it's worth checking out what they're doing, and it's also worth tracking it. But yeah, the vast majority of stuff. Now people get impatient and they go around it. Everybody goes and they do it, but usually you end up paying a price for that because what they do tends to get adopted still by many of the manufacturers. A good example is Blackmagic decided to do their own 12G solution, and that was painful for a lot of us because we have SDI B and A, and there's all these other things that we had to kind of switch where nothing could see it other than what Blackmagic was doing. So it can be a little bit of a challenge, and so it's worth keeping everybody together. It goes slow, so people get frustrated, but then it goes wide. Next question.
Jason Robert Shaw in Sarasota, Florida is up next. He says, tips and templates for creating an engaging bio. I often have to register as a presenter for various online events and read to update my blurb. How do you describe yourself in 500 words or less?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
500 words is an incredibly long bio. I would say start with much, much less than that. In general, I think it's just a form of prose that you have to learn how to write and to speak about yourself in a way that doesn't seem strange. Say what's relevant about you with respect to exactly the audience you're about to address, and hopefully on the topic that you're going to be addressing. I don't know what else to say other than that.
Stuart?
This is something that those of us behind the lens often fail at, and I know I'm absolutely terrible at it because we're not the extroverts. We're the people who make things happen. So, simple solution is find your local extrovert. They're called actors. Ask one of them to write a bio for you, and you might get something that's written about you in decent advertising.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think I changed. I wrote an article decades ago about doing demo reels, and my thesis was you don't want a demo reel anymore, and I don't think you want a resume anymore. What you want are a whole series of little tiny pieces, and then you grab them. In the case of the demo reel, it might be spots or voiceovers or whatever, and you put them together based on what the client has told you they want. So you customize each one. I think your curriculum vitae should be the same thing. You should write little concise things about what you've done and how it affected the client, and then you piece together the ones that are relevant to that client and target them, that presentation, that client.
Go, Todd.
I was going to basically say what Bill said, except the only thing I would add is that I keep a Google Doc, and as a performer, many of us always try to lead with who we've worked with, and instead I've begun these days leading with what I'm passionate about, and basically cutting it into 5 categories and trying to make it 200 words or less, then 300 words or less. And those 5 categories are questions about you, which offer your social proof of who you are and who you've worked with.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So just my own personal preference, when I'm reading something about somebody, I find it most relevant for it to be in reverse chronological order. What somebody's doing most recently, what they did before that, and then how they got started, not to start where they got started.
Go ahead, Ken. Can't hear you, Ken.
Jason has changed his question to be 500 characters rather than 500 words. So he needs it to be squeezed quite a bit more.
Yeah, go ahead, Leland.
I'm going to point people to a place that I use all the time, which is called about.me. If you want to look at a lot of examples of bios that people have put together on that website, a lot of people have strayed from the resume toward the CV or more of a competency-based page of what you can do and your skill set. So I would focus more on that than, your education from 20 years ago or whatever it might be. People really want to know what you're capable of doing right now rather than what you've learned years past.
Go ahead, Sky.
A couple of examples of that exact point would be the IMDb, very succinct, and also LinkedIn. So read other people's resumes and bios and CVs and see what you take away from those experiences.
Stuart?
One extra tip for applying for jobs. A lot of like online applications and what have you now get filtered by machine learning processes and what have you. Include the text from the advert in the body of the email with the same color text as you've got as your background. The computer will see it, will read it, and that is all of the criteria of the advert. Sometimes you can get past the computer filtering to an actual person who will then read your CV, and cover letters, 1 page, no more than 1 page.
So I will admit that I'm the anti all of these things. So I'll just give you my 2 cents about it is that I write bios, and I usually make them, I have some little bio that I have. The big thing for me is that I try to have as little superlatives as possible. Just like, this is what I did. This is what I've done over, that period of time. And if I don't have a lot of things to do there, then I look for things to do in that area so that I have something like I said I can do. I did. I will say that all of my work, none of my work have come from my CV ever. All of my work has come from my work product and the people that I'm connected to, and I would say 90% of the people that I'm connected to. And so you want to find ways that you can work with other people, and partner with other folks and support other folks all the time, because that's where all of it, that's the easiest way to do this. The resume, the CVs, the cover letters, all that stuff is the hardest thing. Now I know that, and also I'm kind of spreading this out because Jason, I think, is talking about when he's talking. So when I'm talking in 500 characters, I am just really trying to just take the highlights that again, to what Bill said, is the very most important things for that group. And 500 characters isn't that long to talk about that. So what is that group going to be interested in? There's a lot of things I've done in the past that are not relevant to many groups that I speak to. So, but what I would say is I know we kind of wandered into the CV world, and I would just say that your CV is fine, but the most efficient thing to do all the time, and it's not something that, this isn't, I often compare it from farming to hunting and gathering. We didn't start growing we didn't start growing until we started farming, like as a species, as long as, and so I look at CVs as kind of hunting and gathering. Building a work product and building a community is farming, and it's building, large connected networks that support you over very, very long terms, and so I would highly recommend always staying focused on that, because I think that the transactional approach to CVs is painful. Next question.
Harry Block is up next from Tel Aviv, Israel. He says, AWS has recently announced support for SRT ingest. Has anyone used it? And if so, do you have comments on it?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Works great.
There you go. Works great. It should work great. I haven't been able to test it yet, but looks good. Next question.
Daniel Goldstein, Washington, D.C. Next, Audacity is now collecting telemetry, including IP addresses. Is it time to use a fork? Other thoughts on the new direction Audacity is taking?
Go, Jason.
Adobe continues to do this and will continue to do this. If you haven't been dissuaded yet, if this is the last straw.
Well, this is Audacity, though. This is not. I don't think this is.
Oh, Audacity.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I was thinking of Audition. Never mind.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So it seems like because Apple is releasing in September, October, this new way of using iCloud to hide your IP address via multiple layers, it looks like companies are jumping on board to get as much data as they can before it gets turned off.
Yeah. Go ahead, Aaron.
So open source data tools with data collection has always been a tough topic for most people. It's as someone who used to do a lot with open source and having to do data collection because we need to know how things work and how they don't work and what people are using and what they're not using, I understand it. Audacity has been sort of nascent as a project for a long time, and now they've come back and now they're doing things again and wanting to know more information about their users. I don't personally have a problem with it. IP addresses are not durable identifiers in any way. They're not going to like sneak in and, you know, steal your stuff or whatever. I feel like it's a little overblown. If you like the tool, use the tool. And, you know, that's it.
Yeah, go ahead, Leland.
It looks like that may be old news that you're looking at. In May, Audacity bowed to public pressure and said that they would not collect telemetric data. So you may want to make sure that the source of your news was recent.
Well, the source,
from
the
what
source
I'm seeing
looking at is yesterday. Source,
okay.
I mean, that's why it came
then
up.
They changed their mind again. That's interesting.
Yeah.
2 months ago, they said they weren't going to do it on version 3.
Yeah, it's on 9 to 5 Mac yesterday. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday. Their company that bought Audacity also has a suite of products that are out there that do different things that collect information that use it. Like for instance, Ultimate Guitar, which is one of the apps, does this really cool thing where you can do like a story type thing in there. So I think they're kind of conditioning it for the whole suite rather than just the one product. But the reality is the product's free. And if you don't know who the product, I messed that up, but you're the product basically.
Yeah, the Muse group, I believe, is the company mu.se, which is a great URL, by the way. Anyways, but they obviously, you know, they have a lot of other things, and so all of these are kind of going out to get more information to basically build marketing later. And so you just got to decide what you want to do. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, I don't know if Daniel's on Mac or PC, and I don't know the Mac equivalent of this, but if you're on a PC, learn to edit your hosts file, and that will redirect the network requests made by the software to basically a null network.
I think in general, I think that this idea of tracking everybody is slowly getting wound out, at least on the Mac platform. You know, people just aren't. I think the problem is it's as Aaron said, it's probably not. It's pretty innocuous, but I think politically, at least for Mac Apple users, it's going to be untenable. You know, like to track people. You know, it's you know, like I went from being, after all those GDPR things that pop up, I went from saying accept all to now I go through and just turn everything off all the time. Like I'm just always, a new website means I'm going to go in and turn everything off except for essential cookies. So I think that in general, I think people are starting to push back, and it's going to make a huge change in our industry. Because it'll be harder and harder to make a lot of the things that work for free as we do that. Next question. Can't hear you. Are you there, Bill? Bill?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Gosh, I clicked one thing but not the other. Gary Harper in London, UK says, is there a standard volume level in RMF or LUFS to aim for when creating voiceover for e-learning content?
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, just to catch everyone up, RMS is root mean squared and LUFS is loudness units relative to full scale. The answer is there isn't a single number, at least not that I know of. Apple Music is 16 below LUFS, YouTube is 13 below, Spotify is 14, and Tidal is 14 below. There's exactly one standard that I know of for audiobooks, which is RMS between 23 and 18 below, and that's for Amazon.
Go ahead, Bill. You're muted again.
Whoops. I'm seeing more and more standardization around -24 LUFS in the voiceover and general narration industry. I'm not saying it's standard, but if I have to start somewhere, that's where I'm starting. As I deliver more and more, I'm getting less and less feedback, but it's still a little bit of the Wild West out there.
Go ahead, Carl.
So there's two parts to this. If you're recording, you want to make sure you're not clipping. So generally -18 on a digital meter, so if it ends in 0, and then if it goes into +18, then you want to hit for 0. That's analog meter. If you're delivering, you want to go to the frequently asked questions part of their web page of whatever service you're delivering to, and it will usually be in there about the mastering. And Jason's gone over a few of them already. It's very important that you look at that for whatever service you're delivering. If you're rolling your own, then -18, -16 is pretty good.
Next question.
Avis, I want to make sure I'm on. Avis Lanzin of Riga, Latvia says, testing zoomosc ISO on MacBook Pro 2014 with 2 NDI 1080 outputs to vMix. Picture is stuttering and lagging. On the same MacBook, Zoom Room's NDI out is okay. Any suggestions?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Kill all of your background processes. Just the bus system of that MacBook alone, I don't think it's really going to be able to handle that really well.
And I guess what I don't understand, I guess it's 2 NDIs out to vMix, and I would assume there's a PC somewhere in there that it's sending those out to, as opposed to, because otherwise you're running vMix on like Parallels or something, which would be a disaster. Go ahead, Leo.
The one thing it doesn't say is which MacBook Pro 14 it is, if it's the 13-inch or it's the 15-inch without the video card. You're not going to get there. You need to have the 15 with the dedicated video, but then it's still going to be really, really underpowered.
Yeah, I'm surprised it works at all. Like it's, a 2014 MacBook Pro would be really pushed to do what you're asking it to do. But you would definitely, the 13 would definitely not work. And you want to make sure that the 15 is plugged in and that it is got the discrete processor activated all the time, not every, when needed. So, and I think that could help, but at 2014, I think that it'd be challenging. Next question.
Rupert McCrae is up next from Dallas, Texas. He says, from pictures I am seeing online of some in-person trade shows, they appear to be low in attendance. Is the panel seeing or hearing anything similar?
Leo.
Well, yes, this weekend I am now booked onto an event which was going to be totally in person, and they've realized that it's not going to happen, or they've got a load of really top speakers turning up, and they've had to jump for us to be streaming the whole event. We're not going to be doing it virtual, but we're going to be doing it streaming and people in person.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I look at travel industry trends for this kind of stuff too, not just what the event industry says. Nobody's traveling for business. So, it's still too early for any of that stuff, I think. Maybe September, October, we'll see, but I doubt it. I think it's, yes. I think people have shifted to not doing business travel anymore as much as possible.
Yep.
Mobile World Congress, which is pretty big.
You're breaking up, Alex. Alex, you fell apart there. Can you try that again?
Mobile World Congress in Barcelona was very, very, very quiet. They had to run it for various contractual reasons, but I don't think they really wanted to run it.
The problem that they have is their entire business model is based on hotel rooms. The entire how Mobile World Congress works is they pre-book all the hotels for the entire city of Barcelona, and then they sell them back out. And they make, I think I heard, $40 million a year just on the hotels markups, and it's all on the people who buy in the last 2 weeks. So they're going to have a really big problem with this. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and a perfect example of this is NAB saw this coming, and they delayed from April to October, and the size of their exhibit space cut down to about 1/4 of what it normally is. Yeah.
I believe that they're not in the South Hall at all, right? They're just in the North and Central Hall.
The North and the Central.
Oh, wow.
And the South Hall is the largest by far.
Yeah, with upper and lower, it's huge. If that's
you could fit the North
and
the
Central Hall and the North.
Yeah, you could hit the Central and the North Hall. I think you could fit on one floor of the South Hall. It's just so that it's to your point, it's tiny. Leland?
Yeah, I heard word from some of the guys I know who are well connected with the PR folks with NAB and AES, who was kind of combined with this conference just to make it legit. They're still talking whether they're even going to go. I mean, there's a lot of people that are still on the fence as to whether they're going to go to NAB. So it's a tough call.
Yeah, go ahead, Leo.
So related, the hotels which I booked literally less than an hour ago, right next to the venue, I've got a £50 a night which normally you would be just paying
Yeah.
3 times that price for a hotel that close to the venue.
Yeah. So it's everybody I've heard is somewhere between 30 and 50% drop off. Now there are a lot of reasons that could be the case, and it could definitely resurge. I don't think it's going to. Like, I'll just flat out, I just don't think we'll ever. I think we reached peak convention and peak conference. I think that as the tools that we are doing for digital continue to get better, it's going to continue to undermine that process. And so I don't think that we're ever going back to where we were. Now, it doesn't mean that we're never going to have any physical events. We're still going to have those. They're just going to be smaller. They're going to be, it's going to be different. But what we had before is never coming back. And people haven't quite got their head around that just yet. Go ahead, Rupert.
I also remember us saying before, it only takes a 10 or 20% difference to need to change the whole model.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, is that a lot of these they don't pencil out if they drop too much. So dropping 30 or 50% means that the conference doesn't pencil out. It doesn't make sense what'll happen is that NAB can get away with it this term if they don't have a good spring event. They'll have to, the problem is then you start having lots of people say, I'm not going to go anymore. Because when you look at an Adobe booth, like, I don't know what the numbers are, but my guess is the Adobe booth with the staff and all the things that it takes to build it, it's probably $5 to $10 million for Adobe to put that booth up, and they're not going to NAB, which is, I think probably the first time in 20, 25 years that Adobe hasn't been there. So that's now Blackmagic's gone the other way. I think they have half the North Hall. So if you're a Blackmagic user, you'll have a lot of fun. There's I wonder if they're going to put a roller coaster in there, some kind of Blackmagic roller coaster with video. Next question.
Live skeet range.
Yeah.
Rupert McRae's up next from Dallas, Texas, and he says, other than AT&T and Fios, is anyone seeing other ISPs in the U.S. rolling out fiber to the residential market? On the other countries, is the fiber residential market competitive or monopolized?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So for in Australia, we have the NBN, which is not competitive because it's owned by the state.
All right, yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
The competitor here in the States for AT&T is Verizon, and their Fios, I think they stopped rolling out Fios. I don't know if somebody else can correct me if I'm wrong, but they had a big push on it about 2 years ago, and then they just backed off it completely.
They've done it a couple times. Verizon has done this thing like, hey, we're going to expand, and then they just stop. And I haven't quite figured it out, like Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, Google's the same way. They kind of do this up and down thing. Like, they started they're rolling out here again too. But in the Northwest, Ziply is expanding. Sonic is expanding in, Northern California. There are a bunch of various fiber rollouts going on right now. AT&T probably has the biggest one in the country. I have AT&T fiber here, but there's still lots of fiber going into the ground. And there's, even around here, there's, 10, 20 fiber build outs already.
Alex?
In the cities in the UK, there's a reasonable amount of competition. Essentially, Virgin did a lot of fiber 10 years ago, and now lots more fibers going in, and there's a reasonable amount of competition. So that effectively, it costs what ADSL did about 5 years ago to get fiber. It's just the next thing that people are getting. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. Leo?
I would say, though, to add to what Alex has just said, the last mile in the UK predominantly is only 2 providers. It is either BT or it is Virgin. There are very few last mile providers. So there are lots of other fiber connections, and there are if you're going for business, but the question was about residential. Residential to the house in the UK is provided either by Virgin or by BT. That's it.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So when I put in my AT&T line last year, they said that they were planning a fiber rollout here in Madison. We also have TDS here, which TDS is on U.S. Cellular is owned by TDS, and they have fiber throughout Wisconsin here, but nothing in town because it's basically you got to have the land to actually run the fiber, and I don't think they have that contract or ability.
Good, Jason.
There is no such thing as residential fiber in New Mexico. However, in the last 6 months, I've done 3 fiber business drops. It is a very common thing here from Comcast.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, here, at least in Toronto, we've got mainly two providers for residential, and then a bunch of other companies that piggyback off that and resell it. And again, like everywhere else, it's mostly commercial.
Mark?
So here, right outside of Washington, we only have Comcast service in Alexandria, and I ordered fiber in March. A box showed up last week, and Comcast is nowhere to be seen to do the install, even though the building already has fiber. Just to give you a little bit of length of time on the East Coast to get Comcast fiber versus out west.
And again, the reason that as Americans that we have this problem is because we don't have pole access. I'm just going to keep saying it. I'm just saying it every day if I have to. All we have to do is open up pole access, and all of this would go away. Like we'd all have 1 gig up and down within 5 years. Because it's just the incumbents being in. Say one thing political, just a little, is that we're in this whole thing like let's break up a whole bunch of companies rather than actually breaking up the ones that affect us every day. Like that's all I'm going to say about it. It affects us as our business. Is that we need to keep thinking about how we're going to pressure people to get us get us fiber to the houses. Go ahead, Leo.
So they tried it in the UK. They tried to unbundle the last mile, and they have enabled multiple providers to get into the exchanges, but the last mile element has just become too costly. And in fact, what ended up happening, what is now called Virgin Media, is literally all of the baby cable providers all got bought out one after another until the point that there was 2 left, and then they swallowed each other up, and that was it.
Next question. We nailed that one.
Vienna in Austria is coming to us, and he or she
Australia.
says
Vienna is in
Australia. I'm sorry, I
Australia,
keep doing this. Every time I see Vienna, my mind just does that. I apologize. Anyway, the question is, what is the best microphone technique for recording vocals, singing, into a multi-pattern condenser microphone?
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm going to say the best technique is to listen. And by that, I mean something very specific. You want to listen while you're doing your performance, but you also need to get away from that performance and come back and listen to it. The technique, what you do with the microphone, whether you're closer and more intimate or whether you're farther away and you're pushing out more, all of those make a difference in the sound the microphone records. The only way you can ever tune up your performance is by both trying to listen in real time and learning what to listen for, but then go back when you're fresh, rehear what you've done, and make adjustments.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, since they mentioned specifically multi-pattern microphones, I would experiment with that, depending on what you're trying to achieve, whether it's voice. It does say singing as well. There's a lot of variations you can get, excuse me, between using it in a cardioid pattern, a figure of 8, an omnidirectional. There was a discussion last week, I think, about how, maybe going back to the orchestral miking, that you're not really going to get a lot of true low end out of a microphone in cardioid pattern. You get the presence boost, but you don't get a clean signal that way. So
Carl,
there's lots of experimentation to do.
I'm just throwing it at Carl.
So if you're in a room where you can control reflections, Omni's the best because it'll give you a flat response, which means you can do the most later on in post. If you're in a room that doesn't have controlled, where you may get a reflection from behind, then maybe cardioid. Avoid figure 8 for vocals generally, because you definitely will get a reflection from behind.
Jeffrey, real quick.
I always like off access, but it's always important if you're recording for somebody, ask them what they want you to do with the microphone first, because they're going to be controlling it in the end.
And Leland, real quick.
And obviously monitoring your voice in the process helps a lot. One thing you'll find is if you're on a powered mic with something, especially with a 48 Phantom Power, watch it using your voice with a little less emphasis and a little quieter, and you'll find that amplification will help you get your voice where you need it.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae is next up from Dallas, Texas. And Rupert says, what is the difference between LinkedIn Live and LinkedIn Events?
I haven't used much of it. I have a LinkedIn Live account, and I haven't streamed to it yet. I got it a long time ago, and I put a lot of pressure on them to get it to me. And then I think we started this, and I couldn't figure out how to shoehorn this into LinkedIn at the moment, or I just wanted to make sure it was really set up. But I think LinkedIn events kind of lets you organize it, lets people set up. LinkedIn Live is going to let you stream to your feed. LinkedIn events is going to let you create an event that people can actually go to. So it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. And we should experiment with that. I think LinkedIn is a pretty credible platform for what we do. I think part of the reason I haven't streamed to it yet is that I'm super careful about what I put on LinkedIn. so that's been, I will eventually do it, but my temperament here may change if I do it, because it's a different community than what we're streaming to right now. Yeah, go ahead, Leland.
If they're going to use it, anything like Facebook provided for an example of live versus events, live is kind of an impromptu, as you want to go live in that environment. The events is more for a discussion-based broadcast where you have people that want to comment about what's going on in that event, and that's really the structure that they're trying to create there.
Next question.
Comes from Scott Wasserman in Detroit, Michigan. And Scott says, recommended clicker or remote control, I guess, for in-person keynote presentations.
Carl.
So always suggest the Canon green laser. There's a red version as well. So the PR10 is a red version of the PR100. It runs off AAAs, so don't worry about it being charged. You can just chuck fresh AAAs in there. It has a physical switch on the side, which is off Keynote and PowerPoint. But this is a very simple device. It'll work no matter where you go. So this is more of a, it's going to work every time kind of device.
Go ahead. Rupert, I'm going to give it to you. Someone jump up to Rupert. I'm going to see if I can find one I use. Go ahead, Rupert.
So just personally, I haven't used a lot, but I have used the Logitech one, which is pretty successfully for smaller presentations. I would want to test it in longer distances, but sometimes it's also, if you're dealing with a USB receiver device, sometimes it's also useful to keep a USB extension with you, just so you can get the receiver out of any noise that's in around the computer system that you're using.
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, I'm hoping that Alex has a pickle. As far as I'm concerned, it's got to be the pickle. Like there's kind of no comparison. He's bringing it out, folks. He's bringing it out. Let's see. Yes.
In my world, there's only one clicker. So like there's no other choice. There's a DSAN. This is a DSAN. And even when you saw the Apple one where they put it into a briefcase and they ran it over, as soon as I saw it, I was like, I know what that is. So this is a DSAN. It's called a Perfect Q. This is the clicker. This is the smallest receiver. So this is a little receiver. So I put this in my bag. Now what this does is it clicks it to this little receiver, has a little antenna, and it will attach via USB to your computer, and then it will, you can run your Keynote from it. This will go hundreds of feet, and it will work every single time. And it is the standard. Like when you go to a stage, on this little one, there's a bigger one. There's a middle-sized one, and then there's a big one that's a big triangle that has a big arrow. So it'll actually make noise. And if you listen to some people's keynotes, you can actually, if you know what you're hearing, you can hear the noise of the clicker from backstage hitting the mic. You'll hear this little doodle, doodle, doodle. Like you'll hear it way, 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 way off in the distance, but because someone turned it up too loud. But anyway, it is, at the level that I've worked at Fortune 10, which is like 90% of the work that I've done in the last 10 years, there is literally not seen another clicker than this one. So their website is horrible. I don't know if it's gotten any better, but for a long time, it was the most horrible website ever. It looks like it's a little better now. Like it literally looked like they made it in 19. That's the big triangle. That's the larger one that Todd's showing. But that is the industry standard, and it's not cheap. And it works all the time. This is the one that I talked about. We send these out. The reason I have these little ones is we would send them out to speakers, and then we would push their USB over IP so that they could literally have, because they were like, I don't, if I can't use this, I can't, like literally the size of it in their hand, they didn't want to figure out how to use anything else. So we had to figure out how to use the USB so they could still use the same clicker that they had in the past. Go ahead, Alex.
I've been at the other end of that
Right.
device, essentially backstage operating presentations for big companies, for large audiences, 3,000-4,000 people. We don't usually let it control the actual presentation, because the person giving the speech, we don't want them to be thinking about it too much, and we need another human being and a person with a brain to actually work out if they actually really meant to click it.
Yeah, this little one is the one that I use when I'm personally presenting. The medium and bigger size ones, to Alex's point, give you visuals, and you can even put headphones into the bigger one so that you can listen to the beep as they work through it. Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, if you're buying a less expensive one, look at the frequency it operates on. The one Alex is talking about is at 433 megahertz, which is a lower frequency and will penetrate walls and much better. Most of them are 2.4 gigahertz, so you're sitting in the same spectrum as Wi-Fi and everybody's phone that's on, in the audience.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I would say exactly what Courtney said. Watch your frequencies. 900 megahertz at the highest I would ever use. The 2.4 is just useless in a normal conference room, but also even in a small office when you have a lot of Wi-Fi going around or machines that are conflicting. We recently put that into a Blue Studio, and it was the Perfect Q Mini. And one of the things I liked about it is you actually could control two machines simultaneously.
Yep.
So you would have a primary and a backup. And that way, if you had problems with a deck or you needed to update a deck while it was live, there was options to do there. I mean, great tools, fantastic tools,
It's
worth every penny.
They're built like tanks. They haven't changed them forever, and they just work.
One other thing. When you get it, change the code.
Yeah. The first thing you do is you change the code. Yeah, it's important. It's the code to the clicker, so that because they all come, I think, on channel. I want to say channel 2.
Yeah.
So they all come on channel 2.
So we had 2 brand new ones, and like, why isn't this working? And oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, next question. Bill, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Daniel Goldstein in Washington wants to know how your vacation was, Alex, and what did you photogram?
I think photograph. Maybe it's photogrammetry. I didn't photogram anything at the thing. I have to admit that from an object perspective, the Apple stuff has me fascinated. And I haven't done a lot of object photography now because I'm waiting to figure that out, which is hopefully the next couple of weeks. This is for some reason it's not updating well as far as high res. So hopefully it's not too soft here, but I'll show you this kind of stuff I take pictures of. These are crabs, sand crabs going into, someone left this was a sand castle, and the crabs decided that this was a really great place to put their, to dig in, and so I found that to be kind of fascinating. I take suddenly I'll take lots of photos of that type of thing. Let's see. I'm very pretty good. A lot of what I was doing was stuff like this. So this is, and again, this is a low resolution. For some reason, it's not updated on my iPad as fast as I thought it would. But this is me testing HDR. And then also I shot this with both a 6K in log, which I'll show you guys later. And then also with the iPhone, which was kind of what I'm testing here is HDR, as well as these are very, very difficult shots to compress well for streaming. So it's mostly me shooting test plates. I also got really into like understanding where the foam was across the front, and you have to shoot it when it's coming in versus going out. It's an entirely different thing. I haven't shot that much right on the ocean there. So anyway, but I shot for about a half an hour every morning just to see what different versions of everything. But this is the stuff that came off the iPhone, which when you see it at high resolution, you keep on looking at it just going, I can't believe that I'm doing this off of a phone. It's kind of an amazing thing. Anyway, next question.
Back again. Rupert's back from Dallas with, how does a public library fit into a digital hybrid world? The local city's library in Texas is spending $62 million on remodeling and moving into a new modernized space. Hopefully media will be a large component.
Go, Jason.
Yeah, hopefully media will be a large component, but modern library science has kind of become more of an archival thing, which is historically, what it's been, just in a different form. So long story short, library science isn't going anywhere, and the way that we archive things has never been more important.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Our local library here was just rebuilt for about the same amount of money. And it is, there's still obviously books, but there is a lot of media stuff involved there. And there's a lot of makerspace stuff. There's a lot of tools for building, not necessarily like wood stuff, but, other things. And it's very much, taking the aspect of like Jason said, the archival stuff, but adding in, it's a major community space, right? And allowing for, and our entire library system is sort of reorienting around that here, which is really good to see. It's very forward thinking and not just sort of attached to the books.
Yeah, I mean, I think to get to the fundamentals of what a library is, I think of it more of as a local learning lab, and it used to be books and magazines and everything else. But how do you make it that learning, like the little one here in Novato has a library with some books, but it's also got tons of places that you can watch video or surf the web. Right next to it, it's got a makerspace that my kids did go to pre-COVID. And then next to that, it has an XR space that kids are learning how to use Unreal and Unity and everything else. And so all of that stuff is all, being tied together. And I think that that's one of the more forward thinking libraries. And it's tiny. It's a tiny little library in Novato, California. Go ahead, Leland.
Obviously a big shift. I've been going to the library since I was 10 years old, and my wife's done the same. But since we visited Kalamazoo, which is similar, I think, to what Alex is mentioning, the media centers that are being built are really kind of intense. But I'm a block away from a library, and my wife and I read more books offline from that library. We check them out from the library virtually, read them, and then check them back in. So yeah, it's obviously a viable business model.
It's where my kids hang out after school. It's just like, that's where they go. We pick them up from there, from one of the libraries that's near the school. So it gives them a place to work. And they also it gives them a lot of knowledge. A lot of knowledge is just around them. So if they think about something, they can just go over and play with that thought. Jeffrey.
So a couple of them, but pre-COVID, they were building podcast centers and media rooms for people to do live streams and podcasts. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are starting to look at Teams and Zoom rooms for people that just can't afford doing that or don't have the computers to do that type of stuff.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
One of the best stories a professional speakers ever told me was they were talking about rock bands and buses, and they were saying, what do you want on your bus? And the bands came back and said, we don't want better buses, we want better bus drivers. And in this case, I don't think it's the library, I think it's the librarians. I hope we continue to celebrate those people who are information scientists, locally accessible, who can help you curate and understand how to get to data, and train people in doing your own research so that when you come out of a library experience, you're better at doing your own stuff. That, I think, would be hugely valuable to society.
Next question.
Moving on to Alex 4D, and Alex says, I'm considering buying an iPhone case that has built-in lenses to get better telephoto performance. Any recommendations?
Go ahead, Rupert.
No personal experience, but I hear Moment are the kind of dominant player in this space.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Schneider Optics from Germany.
Yeah, so both of those make some pretty great tools to do that. Go ahead, Stuart.
I would also have a look at the Small Rig website for some of their cages that you can attach different lenses to. And since Moment was mentioned, that is not a Moment anamorphic. The Moment ones are overpriced, and you can find them at substantially lower value or lower cost if you look on eBay.
Trying to make sure I got the right. Oh no, I don't have the right one. Never mind. I got a macro one that I really like, but I can't. I was trying to find it quickly for all of you. That is kind of a lot of fun. So, but we'll try to do that in the future. Next question.
Carrie Harper in London, UK says, what's the panel's favorite desk mount mic arms? Max budget is $200 or so.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So Alex has the very expensive version of this, but I have this is called the Vivo Black, a height adjustable pneumatic spring microphone. It does the under sling stuff. And the cool thing about this, I wish I could show it, but I'm blocking my PTZ, is I actually have the bar upside down on the table. So it's coming underneath the table, coming up to my voice. So I don't have this arm in my way, and I can hands.
Good, Carl.
So Quick Lock actually make a few different arms that can actually bolt to a table or they can clamp to a table, and they're similar to Alex's. They don't have springs and they're low slung.
The one that I use that people are referring to is the OC White Ultima 2. And I spent hundreds of dollars avoiding buying it. It's more than what you're talking about. They're like $350, and it's the best mic stand I've ever had. And I can swing it, in and out. I can get it to exactly where I need it. It's just easy. It's just really easy to use. So go ahead, Jason.
If $200 is your hard limit, it's very hard to beat the Heil. I think it's a quiet and a completely solid mic arm, regardless of what you're putting on it.
Go ahead, Leland.
As a DJ on stage, tends to make a lot of really good, strong component mic arm pieces that you can make your own little build of whatever nature you like.
Next question. Bill, you're muted again.
Gosh, back and forth. Nathan GS in Singapore says, which micro four thirds prime lenses are recommended for placing cameras just above the monitor?
Go ahead, Carl.
So this is a question I get asked a lot. So I've always said the Panasonic, the 20mm 1.7. I'm using a 50mm, which would be a 25 in micro four thirds world, but my camera's a little bit further away than what a display would be. If you want lens to be at the distance of a display, then a 40mm equivalent, which would be the 20mm here. The 1.7 will give you a nice background blur, not as much as I've got, but it'll give you a bit of bokeh in the background. And this is an extremely sharp lens. These pancake lenses are really sharp, so they'll hold up the image all day long.
Go ahead, Todd. Can't hear you, Todd.
Sorry, the 16mm 1.4 is what I use, a Sigma on my Sony right here. If you like that look.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Nathan, we need two pieces of information to give you a more accurate answer. One is the size of your monitor and the distance back from it. If you're talking about a laptop monitor, you're going to need a wider lens because the camera is closer to you. If you're talking about a big 4K monitor on a wall and you're 6 feet back from it, which is about 2 meters, you're going to need a narrower lens. For a micro four thirds camera with a 2:1 crop, the Sigma 1835 art lens is a great choice.
And I will just say that I for the one that I put over top, I tend to not use a prime. I tend to use a high quality zoom. And it just gives you a little bit more flexibility. I just find that there's a lot of moving around trying to figure things out when you can just make the adjustment. And I think over time you'll do better. The one that I would recommend looking at is the Olympus 12-40. Is a really high quality. The f-stop is not as wide as some of the ones that were just, so if you really want that short depth of field, then I think the shortest depth of field, you want to go to a prime. But I would not do that. So after I've done it many years, we had many primes, and I just wouldn't do it because it really makes it harder to get set up, especially if you decide to change your setup at all. Go ahead, Jason, real quick.
Yeah, +1 on what you said. I gave up on primes a long time ago. If you're going to do it with a prime, you better be prepared to buy 4 or 5 of them because it's just how.
And even then, it's just that you get it on, and then now you're moving your body or the camera as opposed to just zooming in a little bit more. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, would network attached storage, 1 gig or 10 gig, be workable for simple libraries and project storage?
Go ahead, Jason.
The short answer is yes if it's audio samples, but once you get into video, you better really have an elite device. In my experience, it doesn't work very well for larger libraries. Mostly it should be archival.
Yep. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I would definitely say copy it to a local device if you're going to use a NAS.
Yeah, go ahead.
They're great for storing stuff, but they're not reliable in terms of speed.
Well, he doesn't specify, but I'm presuming he means for video work because that is usually the largest bandwidth.
Well, he's saying sampled library, so it's audio.
Audio, you think audio? Because I think that makes a difference. It depends on how much bandwidth you need across all the buses with larger signals like video signals. Dropping frames is always something you want to avoid if you can. And the better network IO you have, the better you can, the higher resolution without dropping frames.
As we move to 4K and 6K, I would never do a NAS for my video, but for audio, I think it totally would work. Yeah, absolutely. So I agree. Next question.
Moving on to Simon Ray in Shrewsbury in the UK. And he says, do the panel have a favorite route for clearing rights to include chart-topping music in either online or physical products? For example, how would you go about legally using Stevie Wonder's Happy Birthday in a video message to a friend?
Go ahead, Bill.
Whoops. There are professionals who do nothing but clear rights. I think if you're working at that level and you want to avoid and you're going to be willing to pay the exorbitant amounts of money to do that, you really need somebody who's a professional at it. We used for many years BZ rights and permissions out of New York City, and we did things like license Bachman Turner's overdrives, taking care of business for a corporate client. It was a lot of money and a lot of hassles, but you can do it. But you need a professional, particularly since you're not just looking for one kind of rights. They will guide you to which kind of rights do you need. Do you need public performance rights for a conference? Do you need synchronization rights to put it onto a video you're doing? It's a thicket, and without a professional, you can run into all sorts of legal trouble.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Years ago in the UK, I had to deal with this for hold music, licensed hold music, and went through a process with the Performing Rights Society there. I'm sure it's different, but that was licensed depending on how many concurrent calls we would have, just as an example.
Yeah, it's really expensive. A lot of the clients that we've worked with have started to move towards it's cheaper for them to hire composers to write their music for the year. So they'll have like, this is all the music we're going to use at all of our events for the next year. And there's 12 tracks that we're going to hire people, and we're going to give them songs. Here's the funny thing is they deliver them songs. We want it to sound like that. We want it to sound, like we don't want to get sued for it. So don't get too close, but this is the vibe, the vibe of what we're trying to do. And so then the composers make something up that's original, but it kind of feels like that thing. And sometimes they don't do that at all. They just have the composers. They like the composers, and they just say, do something that is great, or something that, we know what you do. We just want you to do that. And they'll pay them a lot of money, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that for the year if it's for a large corporation. And that's cheaper than licensing chart topping. When you say chart topping, you're talking about big bucks. Like in Stevie Wonder, you're not talking about, this is not pocket change. This is, you're talking tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to use it. And if it's just for a friend on YouTube, you can probably get away with just putting it up there. Just you don't have to, like no one's going to come after you as an individual. Now, if you're a corporation and you're doing that, then you have to cross every T and dot every I because you're a big target. And it's easy the settlement will be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so you'll just have to write the check. So you might as well. So that's, but if you're like an individual, the best thing to do is you put it up on YouTube. If you're gonna put it on YouTube, let's say, if you're sending directly to them, I wouldn't worry about it. If you're putting it up on YouTube, you put it up. YouTube now has a feature where you can push it up and it'll tell you whether you're going to get flagged or not. And if it's just going to be flagged, if it's going to be non-monetized and this is sending down, whatever, like just put it up. If it's going to be a strike, then you don't want to put it up because it'll damage your YouTube account, or you just create a new YouTube account and put it up and then send them a link. There's a lot of ways around that. But if you're a corporation or a company or an organization, you have to pay a lot of attention to it. And I would just stay away from it if you can. Next question.
From Vienna, Australia this time. Following up on the clicker question, is there a way to use an iPhone as a Keynote or PowerPoint clicker?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yes, there absolutely is. And I will remind you that is going to be working over Wi-Fi. And yes, Apple makes an app for it. So just really avoid that if you care about punctuality.
I've actually used my watch. In a pinch, I had a battery go out on my DSAN. My battery went out, and I used my watch to push Keynote, and it worked fine. But I would not recommend doing it on a regular basis. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, Keynote is really good at doing it if you have the right infrastructure to do it, and it works really well. And you get these. You get the slides on your phone, and you can actually see what you're doing, and you can push it forward and push it backwards. It is amazing how it does it, and you just go into Keynote and you just tell it to remote sync it up.
Yeah, and the funny thing is like, for instance, the remote for Apple TV actually works better on the phone than it does on the controller. Not that I'm bitter. Go ahead, Craig.
Just a question with that. Can you not use the Keynote remote app on the iPad with the Ethernet adapter and then have it all wired? Does that work?
I think it does.
I haven't tried that. I've never actually tried it, but you might be able to do that. Go ahead, Stuart.
I would look for a solution that's not on a mobile device, simply because you don't want the presenter's mobile getting a call while they're trying to advance slides. Mm-hmm. You don't want them getting text messages. You don't want them getting notifications for anything else. If you can get it off that smart device, it's a good idea.
Next question.
Jason Sipe in Murrieta, California is up next. And he said, a family member came to me asking for help in upgrading their Zoom presence. They're on SVP working out, they're an SVP, so a senior vice president working out of a home office. $2,000 is the max budget, including a camera, audio, and lighting. A 2019 iMac with a camera and microphone is what they're currently using. What are the thoughts?
Go ahead, Carl.
I would say the Canon M50 Mark II, which Courtney's got. That's a good start. That's around 600. So that's your camera sorted. For audio, high LPR 40 or similar would be good. A dynamic microphone, like what most of the panel are using. And for lights, these tube lights, so the Pavo tubes or the Godox versions are quite good because they're quite cheap and you can buy 4 of them and you can place them around your room. You can put fabric, so you can put them inside a pillowcase, a white pillowcase, and get some soft light as well.
Go ahead, Leo.
Carl's already covered it.
Very good. Yeah, those are good. I mean, the only thing about the Pavo tubes, we send them out. If I'm given something that I'm going to install, I'll look at the 100Bs or 68Bs because they have a larger surface area, and so it's a little easier to deal with. I might still have some Pavo tubes out there for that. You know, the big step up. I mean, obviously a Brio camera works pretty well. The Sony, was it the 6400? It looks really nice. Again, if I was going to be when I talk to presenters, this is going to push over the $2,000. If I'm an SVP, I'd think about, you know, a Blackmagic 4K or 6K with an ATEM, because it means that you can switch between things when you want to talk. You can show things. It really is a entirely different level of impact. So you're at $2,000, you're kind of almost there, but not all the way there. You could go down to you could do it all for $1,000 without a lot of this stuff. You could, but if you go up to 3,500 or so, you'll end up with something that's kind of shock and awe over everybody else, which if I was the SVP, that's what I would want to do. Go ahead, Rupert.
So, excuse me, as well as all the camera and lighting and stuff like that, and if you are specifically using Zoom, make sure you're getting the best out of Zoom. Pay attention to your stats and the resolution you're sending. If you're part of a business organization, make sure that your account's set up for Group HD, because at 360, all this stuff's going to look grainy anyway. So make sure you're in an HD account at 720. If you're not, then get a Zoom room and start bumping your resolutions. That can work whether you're in your own meetings or somebody else's too.
And we're going to accelerate a little bit and go to the next question. We're running out of time.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael. Would an outboard preamp make that much of a difference with a mic for conferencing and office hours?
Go ahead, Carl.
So quickly, outboard preamp will give you more gain. So a mic like the HiLPR 40 may need a bit more gain. That's what you might get versus the built-in gain knob on your audio interface.
Go ahead, Jason, real quick.
If you have a dynamic microphone, I would say there's no larger single thing that you can do than have a high quality preamp.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says again, have any of you had experience hiring session musicians? How do you handle contracts and payment, if so?
Yeah, Todd.
Having been on both sides of this, we have unions, and so hiring session musicians in New York is quite a thing. And I don't know that we have enough time for this question, Alex.
Let's think about someone put in the second hour. This is a great second hour to work with session artists. I'll see if I can get some to jump on with more than Todd, but others that are here. I mean, just a couple more people that can talk to it. I will say that I haven't hired them. When we did some streaming for Pomplamoose, I got to work with some of the session artists, and we were streaming them, and I think I was never more impressed with a bunch of musicians. I mean, the unbelievable depth of what they understand, and then the width of what they understand is just awe-inspiring. Just like they just switch from reggae to rock to Latin to whatever you ask for, and it's that they understand technically why it is what it is. And they the good ones anyway. Which I think that the Pomplamoose has been good at. Yeah, go ahead, Todd. I don't think you survive very long if you're not good.
Yeah, well, this is true. I mean, Douglas is asking about contracts and payment, and I will just say this, that basically there are union contracts and then there are buyouts. Buyouts are often done with handshakes and a phone call. And I would say, just in terms of how you handle them, if some of the questions that you might be asking are how much does a session musician cost, then I can say that all the unions at Local 802 in New York, for instance, they publish their rates. You can see how much that a basic musician should cost hourly for different situations. So you can kind of get a lock on that, but maybe a second hour would be better for all of that.
Yeah. Next question.
Todd Harder in West Palm Beach is up next, and Todd says, I have video from multiple cameras over a 4-day event. I edit in Final Cut Pro. What would you use to ingest and catalog footage for editing later?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, the whole purpose of Final Cut is that it comes with a database that you use with its range tagging system So I don't think you need anything else in terms of cataloging your footage other than the interior processes that uses. Now, other editing systems that do not have databases built into them, there are all sorts of outboard databases that can perform most of the same functions. Just the benefit in 10 is that it's built in and it works right as you're editing, so you don't have to think about anything outside.
I think the only other app that I'd look at is Lumberjack. If you're on set shooting, you can gather a lot of that data as it's going in, as opposed to having to put it in later in Final Cut. But otherwise, yeah, what Bill said. Next question.
Moving on to Stuart Fairweather of Melbourne, Australia, and here on the panel, drone users. Anyone tried the hack enabling digital HD video out of the DJI FPV Goggles? Looks like another job for a Raspberry Pi, perhaps?
I haven't seen the hack. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I'm going to have to answer this one very carefully. There is no such thing as a hack for a DJI device that they don't allow to continue to be there. So the only real hack is to not update the firmware. Haven't done it personally, but be careful.
Next question.
I've put links in for people who want further information on it.
Yeah.
Because it might be useful for live streaming from the...
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see some example of it. It'd be great. We should stream something. Next question.
Keenan Campbell of Princeton, Illinois says, as we continue with digital first events, what systems or software has the panel found to eliminate next slide, please, from a remote presenter when Keynote is located in our master control offsite?
Go ahead, Lewin.
Well, I'm coming across a new developer. Ian Cook just came up with R Producer, which is a build for vMix calls, but it has a deck upload facility. It also has a controller app so that people can control their slides from there. So we're going to play around. It's R Producer. If you want to come test with us, we'll be over in Ian Cook's Facebook group. So take a look for him and we'll see if we can get this thing to work that way.
Go ahead, Alex.
When I was operating the presentation at a stockholder meeting, I was given a internetclicker.com. So it's a thing a bit of software that you have on the show machine. That's where the streaming's happening from. And I was the remote operator of that presentation. And I just clicked a window in Safari.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff. Jeff?
Did you save me? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. A second internet clicker, and another one is, I think it's actually the pickle or the internet pickle. I have to Google it, but it's effectively the same thing. Internet clicker, though, has been flawless for us, and we've done many events with it.
Go ahead, Bill.
And don't forget presenter training. They're going to say next slide, please, as soon as they hit that part in their notes that says slide. And so I spent too much time cutting that out.
The Keynote will do it remotely. So if you just open up Keynote Live and they just run the one that they have in front of them, and then it just works. So Keynote we found works seamlessly on its own. But the other thing that we've done, again, if they're really into comfort, I think we talked about this over the weekend, but we've used USB over I know this sounds crazy, but USB over IP so that we can just use the DSAM. And just tie it right back into that way they have the creature comfort of what they're used to, and it just does what they want to do. And it has made a lot of our folks feel more at home at what they're doing. What I will say is that what we're continuing to move forward with, and Hasmukh has underlined the power of sending those presentations out as videos beforehand and then turning your event into a discussion, as opposed to I think that this idea of presenting live is going to go away. Like here's the study aids, and then we're going to have a discussion. Doing things in real time to cover that information is a huge waste of everybody's time. And so it's we can that's how you do it, but that's not the way it should be done. And eventually we're seeing more and more people with just incredible success at sending out the videos ahead of time and then discussing it. The interesting thing is, you don't need everyone to watch the videos. You need 10% of the viewers to watch the videos, and it will create the conversation. That's the secret to the whole thing. Is you think, oh, not everyone's going to watch them. Who cares? Like they'll still be part of the conversation, and the conversation will move through it, and it'll still be interesting for the folks that are there, and they'll probably get more out of it than what they're doing, because most of the time what they're doing is working on their email while you're doing your presentation. Go ahead, Jeff.
I agree with you in some ways, Alex, but I also feel like that there are places that have to do it live. Like we just did a conference 2 weeks ago, and there's no way, there was very sensitive data. There's no way they would distribute that out
Yeah,
ahead of
yeah,
time.
no,
So
there's-
it had to be live, and it had to be ingested. It was more of a training type
Yeah.
situation.
There's definitely that, but that's 1% of what we're doing. and I work in facilities where we have to, the presentation's all going to be there, and we have to take off all over. I have to put give them my watch, like everything as I walk in. And in those environments, you absolutely have to do it live. But for 99% of the world that does these, it's just because people are comfortable with it. And it's mostly that this is the way they've done it for the last 40 years. And it was never a good idea. It's just that now it's become painful, and we have tools that make it better. Next question.
Christopher Savato in Salem, Oregon is up next. And Christopher says, I have a Behringer X-Air 12 and was looking to add an X-Air 16. It looks like they are getting harder to find. And I heard the app doesn't and won't work on the recent iOS. Are there any ways out of this? Is there another similar priced option?
All the electronics are tightening up, and they'll continue to tighten up for the rest of the year. If you want something, you're going to have to get aggressive about finding it. Talk to Hosmok, according to Hosmok, everything is available in South Africa. So you just have to figure out somebody in South Africa that knows that can send it to you. I don't know why, but everything seems to go down there. But yeah, I would get aggressive about getting electronics right now, because we're in a huge tightening turn. Go ahead, Carl.
So Behringer actually replied to this question officially online. They're saying that they're only trucking stuff out of their Chinese factories. So all their parent, the parent company Behringer, so Music Tribe, and all their companies, they're getting stuff into the UK, which you'll find it on Andertons. So all the stuff you're asking for, you'll find it at Andertons or Thomann, because they've reignited the Spice Road. So they're trucking stuff from China into Europe, into
Why
the
are
UK,
they doing that?
and because there's no shipping containers. Their chip shortage, they don't have a chip shortage in their factory because they create their own
Right.
chips. What they have is a shipping container shortage. They can't get stuff to North and South America. They can get it to Africa, Europe, and Asia. So buy it from Andertons in UK, buy it from Thomann, or Amazon UK, or Amazon Germany.
Hey, go ahead, Jeff.
I'm running into the same thing too. This recent studio build we did, we just got out of China. I mean, it was like within a day, and then everything just disappeared as far as shipment times, almost tripled. So if you can find it, don't hesitate. Buy it right then.
Next question.
Nathan GS in Singapore says, using 2 sets of Saramonic Blink B2, 4 transmitters at once, frequently I get one unit dropping off. Restart of the unit usually gets it going again. It's a 2.4 gigahertz congestion issue, maybe? Any recommendations?
Jason?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. The frequency is 240 to 2483 megahertz, which is the very low end of 2.4 gigahertz.
Next question. Bill, you're muted again.
Second to the last one for first hour, Jim Hankins, Chesterfield, Michigan. What USB over IP solution do you recommend for digital first DSAN use?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Virtual here or Flexi Hub, or if you're using cloud, then Teradici or Parsec, which carry also the USB with it at the same time.
Yeah, I have to go back and look. We haven't done it for years, so I have to go back. I know that we did it a lot in 2016, 17. It was like every other show. So I have to go back and look at it, because we've just moved. Most of the shows that we do just don't have keynotes anymore. I mean, don't have slides anymore, and it's probably because I'm hard to be with if you're using slides during your show. So I probably have killed off the clients that do that, that want to do that a lot, and not on purpose, but I can be difficult about it. I know you never think that I'd be difficult about that, so we haven't seen it for a couple of years. Now we're going to shift gears late, but we're going to shift gears to audio filters, and we're going to talk about it. I think the first question that came in is a great one to start with. So we've got one from Dan H. In Erie. Go ahead, Bill.
Sure. The first question for this new section is, could you basically describe why I would need an audio plugin?
Why are we even talking about this? Go ahead, Leland.
I'll give a brief overview. Basically, you may have a mic that doesn't have the ability to be altered in any way. You may not have dB switches on it. You may not have a low pass filter or a high pass filter. So one of the ways you can do that is to install a plugin into the audio software that you're currently using to enhance the mic's capability.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
And a plugin is a little bit like what we used to call sidecar files. I mean, there's a primary path that these devices use. And then often you want to affect that path and do something different with it. Either color it through EQ, raise or lower its level, something you want to change with that. And plugins are a way to add new capabilities after the original circuits are designed so that you can do not just a couple of things, but often many, many things. And so this architectural idea of the little sidechain converter has just blown up, and there are tremendously useful ones out there.
And to back up to what the original plugins, I mean, I don't know if they're the original plugins, but one of the first ways that we saw software plugins was in Photoshop. And what it allowed, what Photoshop did, what the Knoll brothers did, was allowed one person to work on the core while the other person solved real problems quickly and easily as needed on the ground. So, so one was able, so what plugins allow manufacturers to do is to really work on the core and put in things that everybody's going to use. Look at what 90% of the people are going to use 90% of the time. Then allow other people to generate tools that will solve specific problems for niche markets that are related to that tool. So the reason they exist is so that the manufacturer was never going to get around to everything. They're not going to pay. There's only so many programmers, but someone who has a specific thing that they think would be interesting allows them to build that tool and solve that specific problem that may not be applicable to everyone, but is applicable to enough to keep a business going. Go ahead, Jason.
If an analog hardware audio mixer is a device that standardizes the inputs from and then customizes the outputs to various audio places, plugins would be kind of the pieces that would do each of those individual components independently of each other without ever needing hardware.
Next question.
It comes from Mark Renzel of Tumwater. And Mark says, does Carbon Copy Cloner or Super Duper reliably back up audio plugins and their authorizations to an external drive?
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm going to pull a Mickey and say it depends. And the slightly less sardonic answer is, as long as you don't selectively restore, anything that's going to copy the entire drive, as long as it restores correctly, is probably going to handle any sort of authorization involved. And if it reauths, then you might be in trouble. But yeah.
Yeah. The trouble you can get into is that some of these will look at the MAC address. Some of them will look at stuff that is, that it's tied to a specific piece of hardware, so that you can't do that. And so they will tie some of these a little bit tighter than just a file. And then it's hard for that to move forward. If you're using another drive on the same computer, it works. If you're using another drive on a new computer, it doesn't work. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was going to say the same basic thing. It depends. Sometimes the authorizations are key to the system. And if the system doesn't have the authorization code to talk to the plugin will not function. So you can say, I'm going to back everything up, and the plugin itself may get backed up. But if you put it on a new machine and try to load that machine isn't authorized for the plugin, it will fail even though you're a licensed user. So you have to understand where the authorizations are kept, and you have to make sure that that's on the new machine.
And some of this
to get it affected.
And some of this actually gets better when you have a hardware key. So iLock is one of the hardware keys that is used by things like Pro Tools and other larger plugins. And then you just carry that key around, and as long as you pop that key in, it knows what to do with that. So that's another way to solve that. The iLock is the UI for iLock is just insanely bad, just insanely bad. But once you get through it all, it is fine. I carry a resolve key around in my backpack because I use codes for most of it, but I still have those old resolve keys. All those old ones still work. And I just know that any computer I walk up to, I can install it and just throw that key in and have it work. And so there is some convenience to it. Go ahead, Leland.
If for some plugins, they're all different. VST plugins typically load in Windows in a Steinberg directory under program files under VST plugins, which are kind of portable. So you can drag those files anywhere to save them out for other uses in other directories on other machines. Waves just came out with a Waves Central command kind of. It's a feature set where you have all of your keys that are necessary for the Waves plugins. And then not only can you activate those plugins in Waves command, but you can also install them from there as well and track with little check marks which ones are installed and which ones aren't activated on your system.
Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael's back up again. And Douglas says, if you were using orchestral sample libraries, could one SSD per library be best, or would one SSD for all the libraries suffice?
Go ahead, Todd.
In general, I mean, it's all kind of a space issue, at least as I look at it, because libraries get loaded into RAM quite a bit when they're first instantiated. So it kind of doesn't matter where they're coming from. There are people in the soundtrack industry who use entire Windows machines to house their sample libraries and then use a bridge to bring them in to use them with great efficiency. But I don't think it really matters, Douglas, at all.
And go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, exactly what Todd said. They go into RAM. So as soon as you put it into your DAW or your contact, if you want to do a sample library, as soon as you initiate that, it's going to be put into RAM. So RAM is your key player there, not storage solutions.
Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael's back again. And this time he asks, if you are using, whoops, did that not cycle? Has anybody, there we go, now it's cycled. Has anyone worked with the Waves sound grid system? It has been popular in the live market, but I have not seen it frequently used in the studio.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, that's because the hardware that you need to really make it sing costs quite a bit of money. With the hardware, in my experience, it works beautifully. And other than that, I'll defer to Jeff.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I think it just depends on what they're familiar with is a big part of it. And Waves is a big jump. The LV1 process is a big jump for a lot of people. I kind of compare it between a digital board and then you're stepping into a computer-based digital board, more or less. And the sound, what's the other, SAC, software audio console, is another similar type thing that allows plugins and stuff too. But the Waves LV1, I was hoping he would be here today. Tucker is a huge proponent of it, loves it, and we've done a couple things together with it, and he can make it sing. So if you need to get some real answers, reach out to Tucker because he could definitely help you.
Next question.
Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York says, do you mind breaking down Waves cloud licenses specifically?
Does anyone use it enough to?
It's such a pain. It's such a pain. I feel like they change it every 6 months.
So yeah, so I guess we don't have the people here to answer that question today. Next question.
Mark Renzel in Tumwater, Washington again. Audio plugins. Any opinions on Acon, the Acon digital platform plugins and versus Isotope RX?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I don't know the Acon line, but I can tell you that there are few things to rival Isotope RX on anything that it does. It is absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, Isotope is such a standard at this point. It would be fun to test both of them and have some of the folks here test the two of them against each other. But Isotope has been so core to so many things for so long. It would, if I was going to just choose out of hand, I would just go with. But they may have some specific things. I know that I still use things like the Isotope is great for it, but I'll still use Synaptics Unveil for some correction that's necessary because it still will, I think, does a better job. So there can be very specific areas and specific problem. That's the power of plugins, is that you have a very specific problem and a very specific plugin that you'll just use for that one thing. But in general, the Isotope is the way to go. Next question.
Moving to Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C. And Daniel says, does anyone have experience with Vienna Ensemble or Audio Gridder as a way of networking computers during live audio production?
Oh man, we got stumped. Did we get stumped? Todd?
That's kind of what I was mentioning earlier was exactly the answer to that question. And I know people in Hollywood who do it, who write soundtracks all the time, and it's very effective. I have no experience because I don't.
Can you explain what it is for folks?
Sure. Let me look at that question again so I can be a little bit more informed. Does anyone have experience with the Vienna Ensemble or Audio Gridder as a way of networking computers? Yeah. So what's interesting, I remember it being called Vienna Bridge or something. It was Carl, please back me up on this because I'm going to run out of information quickly. It's basically using the sample library on an external Windows machine, could be anything, and using that processor in that machine to basically create a networking situation where you can gain access to those samples extremely quickly. I'll stop. Go, Carl.
Good, Carl.
Yeah, so I remember Vienna Bridge, so maybe they've just changed the name of it, but essentially what it was, you could actually have it networked out to multiple seats. So you could have essentially a server that had your Vienna library on it, which was usually a pretty powerful computer with a lot of RAM, and then you would have a bridge out to other clients who were working on generally television and commercial soundtracks.
They both look like they belong in a second hour. This stuff looks really cool.
I mean, it's kind of simple in a sense because it's essentially just like adding RAM that you couldn't ever get into your computer. Basically adding a whole other system for RAM to hold those samples at one time.
That's really cool. Next question.
Jason Sipe in Murrieta, California is up next. And Jason says, has anyone had any experience using Era 5 bundle from FX Factory? And if so, which plugin do you find yourself using the most?
Wow. This is also the thing with plugins.
Where's Mickey? Oh.
Yeah, Mickey. I'm afraid that's my fault. Mickey's so busy right now. Yeah, I don't know if we.
I don't know FX Factory at all.
Bill.
I know FX Factory pretty well because on the Mac side, it's very active and they make very good plugins. It's kind of one of the classes of the pack. So I would have a tendency to trust things. I haven't used that specific bundle.
Well, the Era bundle, this is an audio one, and it looks like it has a lot of the same tools that would be similar to what iZotope does. As I'm scanning through it for prices that are in the same ballpark. So I mean, it would be interesting to test all of these head to head. And it's hard to test them all head to head because they attack it in different ways. So that's one of the things to look at as well. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and there's another thing too. Different computers like PCs and Macs use different audio processing engines inside. So a lot of plugins on the Mac run under a thing called Core Audio, which is one of the basic level audio system handlers that they know the chip is going to handle. On the Windows side, there are equivalent things. So certain plugins, they need to be written, I think, a little differently. So it's not one of those things you can take a plugin for one thing and put it over to another plugin because they're using different internal audio engines. But I think they're fast and good plugins available on both sides. So this isn't a stopper. It's just know that they're not the same ones.
Next question.
Next question comes up from Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C. Are there any plugins that are especially good or bad at running on virtual cloud machines, especially in regard to licensing?
Go ahead, Jeff. I didn't wait for your hand.
He didn't even have to raise his hand. I love it.
Especially good? I don't know. It depends what your needs
especially
are.
Bad. Like, are there any that you have trouble
Bad?
installing on the cloud? It's mostly installation and working with them. Do you have any that are particularly hard to do in the cloud?
Well, it's honestly, it's easier if it is a software licensed plugin for sure. Right. So in the cloud, that's way easier. Having to carry up dongles via USB that's a failure point. So keep that in mind. So look for plugins that are software licensed. We personally use Mixbus in the cloud by Harrison, which is also Ardour on the OEM side. And those plugins that they have compatible, like Harrison has the XT, or you could use VSTs with it, they're perfectly fine. No issues at all. I mean, it works perfectly. So just like as you would expect it to.
Go ahead, Bill.
One of the things that I've experienced over the course of time, I think anything that wants to work in real time, and a lot of these audio plugins do a lot of processing and they need to have very low latency so that a musician or someone can hear exactly what they're doing. They tend to work close to the silicon in your machine. That sometimes means these plugin environments have a little more complex an installation path with permissions and things like that. They don't kind of sit on top of your software. They really burrow down into your software. So sometimes it takes a little while to get it working correctly. But once you do, and once all the permissions are granted, it tends to work really smoothly from then on. Just a note.
Next question.
Henry Ramos is next, and he says, Leland Best, favorite audio plugin for vMix. Are you using any auto leveler ones?
Basically, yes. I use Ozone 8, which is one of those that, here, let me give you a little example of which one that would be. It's by Elements. This is the one that I use to add any high pass filters, low pass filters, high shelves and such. So if I need to level my audio, I can do that here as well. As far as any other plugins that I like in vMix, I have Accessible Spectrum Analyzer, which is my way of just keeping an eye on where I'm at on the meters, along with my little play around vintage VU meters so that I can play around with the old school methods, and of course WM meter, which is used for getting the levels like Mickey does. So, and you can find his settings out on the Discord as well. I'll drop the link he gave me so that if you want his settings, you can find them.
Go ahead, Jason.
Independently of how I'm mixing video, I always have a dedicated computer. It's always directly to my right running Spectre, just because it's so much easier to be able to see it.
Next question.
Next one comes from Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C., and he says, what should we all know about using audio plugins in vMix?
Leland?
Oh, I guess I'll take that one. Or Jeff, if you want to go first, go ahead.
But let Leland give you the good parts of it, and then I'll come back with the bad parts.
He's going to do it one way or the other. Basically, when it comes to an audio plugin in vMix, what you have to watch for, they're just now starting to get access for the VST3s, if I'm correct. It always used to be VST2 plugins that were the only ones that worked in vMix. You have to create a separate audio input device or attach the audio input to your video device in order to access the audio features within vMix. Once you get to that input, it's simply clicking on that input gives you the audio settings to the right on the button for that input. And I can show you that real quickly so that you can understand what I'm talking about here. So let me just change screens real fast. On that input, you'll see over here for the audio settings, this little button. When you pop that up, it's going to allow you to get into the actual plugins themselves. Let me get that window that popped up over here. That one popped up and didn't let me get to it. So this is the one that's going to come up. This is where you can control basically everything to it. The plugins here are installed by simply finding the driver that's in the Steinberg directory somewhere in your PC, and then locating the one that you want to use. Once you've entered it, it's going to pop up on the screen. Typically, if you don't see it pop up on the screen, you hit this button to show the editor, and that will actually give you the interface for the plugin, and then you can work in it from there. Jeff, go ahead.
Okay, so with power comes responsibility, that whole twist. This is the problem I have with running a bunch of plugins on a video production tool, is you can overwhelm it because the plugins may be pulling too much. So be careful, test, and don't expect just because it loads that it's not going to pull down your system too. So I prefer to offload, if at all possible, to more of a dedicated, either a dedicated machine that's running the plugins or a dedicated piece of hardware. In the audio world, still use hardware if you're on location, but if you're in the cloud as many times as I am, I'm using a dedicated instance that is doing just audio mixing.
Next question.
Daniel Goldstein back again, this time with what's your processes for determining if a plugin has sufficiently low latency, reliability, and so forth to be used live particularly?
Go ahead, Carl.
So this is where the Waves hardware comes in. That's what it's designed for. It is expensive. As Jason said, that kind of stuff is expensive. Generally, most of the plugins that do a good job are not designed for live. So there are some stuff that Avid have and that Waves have that are designed for live that use hardware modulated, and the XC2 and the Wing now do have a Waves card that allows you to hook up to this expensive outboard hardware. But generally, once you're talking about live and plugins and you're not going to do it in a rack, then you're getting expensive equipment. Most plugins that are affordable and that are highly featured are generally after the fact, they're post.
Next question.
Next question comes from Rupert McCrae of Dallas, Texas. And Rupert says, any recommendations for a lightweight spectrum analyzer plugin?
Go ahead, Jason.
Soundbeam on iOS is basically an oscilloscope, and it's extremely versatile. It's not a plugin for desktop. I'm sure that Carl has an idea. I've bought so many over the years that I kind of lost track.
Go ahead, Carl.
So the one I actually use and the one I see used a lot is M Analyzer. So M Analyzer is free. It's from Media Productions, I believe that's what it's called. Just put an M Analyzer into Google, you'll find it. It is, even the free version, it is pretty full on. So you do want to read the how to use it, the manual. But this is like one of the most bonkers frequency analyzers I've ever seen as far as what you can do in the free version. The paid version just allows you to do a few other features actually, but the free version is quite amazing.
And the one that I see the most inside of DAWs and so on and so forth is Insight 2. That's Isotopes. Insight 2 is really popular as far as general analyzation. I still use Spectre a fair bit for what I do because it's standalone but you have to have already bought it. I don't think that Synaptic has made it available.
They still
again.
haven't unlocked it yet.
Yeah, and I haven't tried it on Big Sur, so I don't know if it goes over or not. But it
works. It
works. Okay, great. Yeah, there you go. So eventually we'll be able to use it there. But Insight I've played with a fair bit recently, and it's pretty slick. Next question. Oh, go ahead, Leland. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just the one I demonstrated earlier was Accessible Spectrum Analyzer, and VB Audio, the makers of Voice Meter, also have Spectralize Me. It's an off-axis type spectralizer, but analyzer. Now I sound like Alex. Sorry, but it's there if you need it.
How did that become me sounding like me?
You did that earlier. You had
I did. Oh, very good. All right, next question. Can't hear you again, Bill.
James Hutchinson of Dublin, Ireland says, why is Waves LV1 so expensive? Any suggestions for an inexpensive Mac alternative?
Go ahead, Jason.
There is no alternative. There's no alternative. That's one of the reasons that it is expensive. Oh, and a quick correction on Spectre. I was running it through Dante, so although it is running on a machine that's running Big Sur, it's not actually running, so no, doesn't work.
Next question. Go ahead, Todd. Go ahead, Todd.
I was just going to make a little plug for something that I use, which is Stephen Slate's plugins, Slate Digital. Also virtual microphone systems as well, but some of the reproductions of older hardware units are pretty extreme. And $14.99, I believe, gets it for you per month. So it's kind of a pay as you go model, and I've been using it for a long time.
So it's $15 a month, and you just get everything. Is that right? I can't hear you, Todd. I don't know if you're talking or not.
It's in a certain bundle. Sorry.
Okay.
Navigating two computers.
So yeah, for
instance, the mastering plugins, right? All come. I can show you the bus if you like another time, but I know Jason wants to respond to this, so I don't know what he wants to say.
Go ahead, Jason.
No, I don't want to respond, but if this is actually Mickey in the chat, I loved his response. LV1 is the inexpensive alternative to hardware mixers.
That's good. That's good. Very good. Next question. I can't hear you, Bill.
Andrew Lipnick of, I hate not having a button with a physical up or down, says when to use a multiband compressor, for example, Waves C6 instead of a dynamic EQ, Waves F6, or vice versa. So use cases.
Go ahead, Carl.
So multiband compressors are usually, well, I say usually, I've used them in the mastering end of the stage. So essentially where you want to compress one part of the musical part, say the drums or something, or you don't want to compress the drums. You want to leave the drums alone and they don't affect the compression, and you're compressing the guitar or the singer. Multi-band EQ is simply just an EQ that allows you to do multiple bands in like one go, rather than having like an EQ after an EQ after an EQ. Multi-band EQ is just like one EQ that gives you multiple bands, and you can go up and down in those. So that can be used anywhere in the chain, even ingest, with a microphone, or in mixing or in mastering. So they're kind of like two different tools. One's like a chisel, one's like a planer.
Next question.
Keenan Campbell at Princeton, Illinois says, thanks to Carl for raising the bar with the in-show graphics. Is he reading questions ahead to get the graphics ready, or how does he make them so fast? And bravo.
A slight detour from plugins.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carl.
So You saw with my my last graphic. Let me just put that up again. So the reason why there was a bit of a delay because I hit save on my computer when the question was asked. So it took 10 seconds to load up on my phone so I could show it. So yeah, so I see a question and I go, oh, I know. So that's actually the M analyzer is something I use for synthesizers because it's ridiculously good and it's free. There is a paid kind of version, but yeah, it's free. But yeah, so I read the questions, I see, and it's always based on what I've used in the past or what I know. What I've hired or what a company that I've worked with has used. So generally it's from first-hand experience. I don't usually give advice on stuff I've Googled because that's not really what I do. But it's usually first-hand experience stuff that I've used over the years or stuff I'm intending on getting and I've researched quite a lot.
And the graphic is just Keynote, right? It's just Keynote with your quick alpha fill, a quick
That's
alpha
right.
pull and some cropping. And our goal as we go into 2.0 is that we're going to put together, if people are up for it, put together a team that just does that during the show. So, 3 or 4 people who are just going ahead of the questions and finding stuff that's there. So stay tuned for as we start to kind of make that available. All right, next question.
Carl, they don't allow you. I'm surprised they allow you on the internet if you're not willing to give opinions about things you know nothing about.
Or anywhere. Anyway, next question.
Gary Harper in London, UK is up next. And he says, question for Jason. You mentioned having Spectre on a separate system. Is there a low latency iPad version or an equivalent that will respond to the audio on a MacBook?
That's a tricky one. There's no reason that, the onboard version that will just simply show, like the ATEM control panel, an audio level can't be done with anything that's running MIDI. As far as a specific one, other than like Touch OSC, my answer is not that I know of.
Next question.
Comes from Daniel Goldstein, again in Washington, D.C. Daniel says, during post-production, not live, what are your various philosophies about plugins that mimic analog pieces of gear versus something like OEK Sound, Soothe, which is performing computations that couldn't be done with analog gear?
Go ahead, Carl.
So this is something I've actually looked at. I use outboard gear myself, so I am actually using outboard gear for post-production stuff. There's only one part of the chain where I actually use, and that's in the finalizer. So this used to be an outboard piece of equipment back in the 90s, probably found in most trucks, production trucks, as far as just dynamic compression and EQ. They've gone software now because they realize computers are much more powerful than their hardware version, which came out around the 2000. So this is the only, and it has blocks. So every kind of plugin we've been talking about is in here. And the reason why is because this has essentially been paid for over the years by the hardware that's been put into broadcast trucks.
Go ahead, Bill.
There's another entire classification of plugins that Universal Audio particularly is really good at, and it is emulations of classic analog gear that has a huge cachet kind of in the industry. So a lot of big hit records were made on something like an LA2A compressor limiter, and people want that sound. So their kind of speciality is figuring out what caused that sound to sound the way it was and emulating that piece of hardware. So if you want that sound, you can get it again. And they have, all sorts of different individual branded pieces. I want a Manly this, or I want a whatever, even microphones, and they'll emulate the sound of them. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether that's as good as the original, but at least they're attempting to bring back sonic profiles of things that people have shown they liked or that were part of hit records and things like that in the past.
All right, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, my quick take on these, there's a company that always, does these Apple style demos, and then they spend a lot of money advertising them on Facebook with, extremely precise, super flat ribbon mics that, you just spend a little bit in software and boom, you want this, boom, you want that. At the end of the day, they keep impressing me, and there is no substitute for the hardware that, well, there's a reason that it costs what it does.
I just want to say that I don't know why I didn't know it. I didn't know that Finalizer was a thing. This is kind of a really cool, cool little tool. Anyway, Leland.
Yeah, and I think Bill touched on it pretty well, that there are companies like Harrison, Mixbus, they build their software and plugins to emulate the older analog systems. And we always have to remember, sound is subjective. We have to look at it from our ears. So if it sounds good to you, then you're probably on the right track. If it doesn't sound good, then you're probably on the wrong track.
If it sounds good to you and you have good taste. Like there's a lot of people that it sounds good to, and I go, ooh, I don't, like the way I say that is that you want to train your ear in the same way that you want to train your eye towards things. Just because when you get started, your eye and your ear will always not be very good. You know, when I went to the first time I went to Zimbabwe, there is serpentine stone sculptures all along the road, or there used to be. They made them illegal. Now they're in like areas that you can go to. Anyway, it's a big business. There's thousands of sculptors in Zimbabwe, and it's an amazing work. But I started buying things, and a friend of mine that lives in Zimbabwe said, you should just walk. You can buy little things like for $1 or $2 for your friends or whatever, but don't buy anything. Don't spend more than $10 on anything for the first week and a half. You know, I was there for a month. And they were like, you know, just watch and just keep on looking at it. And then I went with my friend, and he would point out things like, look at how the curves are, and look at the softness of this edge versus and look at these chips, and look at this detail, and look at this. And he really knew it, and he started showing me all these things. Now, the stuff that I bought, I wouldn't even give to my friends, the stuff that I bought in the first 2 weeks, because it was just, I thought it was amazing. And I got very clear that it wasn't all, it was just really stuff you give to kids maybe, but it just really wasn't there. And it was only cost a couple dollars. It was fine. But that was a huge lesson for me in training your eye, you know, and being able to, so when we say you have good, you know, if it sounds good to you where you've learned from other people what to listen for, and there's like golden ear training that you can literally listen to, and it says, listen for this, listen for this, listen for this. And you can hear it when we do our ruthless reviews of us picking at little, you know, very little things about what we sound like. But what we're not just doing is fixing our system. We're training our eyes, or training our ears, you know, and when we do our ruthless reviews, it's training people to look for certain things as well, so that we can all get better. But I just want to outline that, because you really want to work on your ability to see things, because almost anybody can produce a great piece of work with practice and that understanding of what they're actually looking at and being critical. But it's the eye and the ear are more important than the tools all the time, you know, because I watch people who, I mean, you say Wesky from ILM could build 3D models in Photoshop from this little plugin called Cyber or something. I think, I can't even remember what it was called, but John Knoll built this thing that extrude out based on black and white. You say would build models that were better than things that I could build in Photoshop by painting them, you know, because he could see what he was trying to do in his mind, and he was able to close that gap with whatever tool you put in front of them. And another friend of mine named Ian McKeag, you know, just used to say, any artist that can, if any artist is around me, I don't know if Ian's going to get upset that I said this, but anyway, he said, if any artist is around me and they complain about their pencils, I know they're not very good. like you know, like you could hand Ian like a brick, and he would just like, you start tapping on something and just draw something that you'd put on your wall, you know? And so, you know, a true artist is someone who can see that, and they can see it in their mind's eye, and they can close the gap with whatever you hand them. Go ahead, Todd.
Yes, all that. And every single program, every DAW from Reaper to Ableton, everything comes with their inbuilt, you know, suite of effects. And just using an EQ8 to just, you know, find out and listen to what happens when you accentuate and take away frequencies is invaluable. And as we were talking about before, you get to the people who start to specialize in these things and start to emulate old, as some of the audio folks on this chain might remember some of these particular machines. When you start to do that, you bump up in money, and then eventually you'll get to hardware again, and hopefully used hardware, which holds its life forever. Yeah. But yeah, software, just start and do.
And then you'll start to see and hear things, and then you'll start to need tools that do those things. You know, like
and I'm doing that, and I'm doing that with visuals right now. That's kind of how I am with video.
I had a whole back and forth last night with a DP and director over something we're doing in the future about the nature of lens, the nature of lens coatings and how they affect the image. and we were, talking about, because they wanted a certain look, and we were like, well, we might want to look at K35s because those are, those have that. And then we started talking about the nature of those. And so you can get into something where it's not like all lenses are the same or all mics are the same or all, there are things that if you're trying to do something very specific that they do make a difference. So I don't want to undermine that, but at the same time, a huge, 90% of it is the talent that's running it. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, anybody who's been doing this a long time will agree with that sentiment 100% of the time. I'd rather hear Elton John on a bar piano than anybody I know on a Bosendorfer. It is the talent that eventually has to shine through these things. I will also note, though, that sometimes it's just where you are in life and things like that. I doubt if any of us were able to teleport back to the Beatles at Shea Stadium would think this is a great sounding concert. It was an iconic moment, though, because it meant more than the sound. And I do think that there are circumstances like that. I had my very first radio with any kind of headphones was an old Panasonic, like take to the beach radio, but it had a stereo plug-in and almost like stethoscope earphones. I used to put it in a backpack and ride my bicycle through Papago Park all the way downtown when I was learning radio. I was excited about my life. I was excited about what I was doing, and I loved the sound of that thing. If I put that back on today, I would probably think, gosh, there's no low end, but I loved it.
I have to say that my experience is just like, I'm dropping Spotify. I'm getting serious about just getting all my things off of there, because I started listening to just the stereo of what Apple Music is doing, and not the Atmos stuff. However they're processing it has so much more detail than Spotify. Same headphones, and I think the example that I think I used was what was it? Van Halen's Panama or something. You just listen to Van Halen Panama on Spotify and then listen to it on Apple Music on AirPod Pros or AirPod Maxes, and it's night and day, and that hasn't been processed. That's not an Atmos. So while we can listen to all those things, and all those things were an experience, we are definitely moving out of the MP3 phase of our existence. The last 20 years has been kind of the dark days of music, of cheap and badly compressed music, and we're moving back into something where you're not going to get very far if you don't hit the high quality that we're going through, because people are going to get, once you hear it a lot, the other stuff sounds pretty muddy pretty quickly. Next question.
Scott Mueller in Clinton Corners, New York says, if you're streaming a Zoom call to a different platform, is it possible to use audio plugins that would introduce latency effectively because the stream is delayed anyway?
Go ahead, Carl.
So most plugins don't take streaming audio. They take audio that's in a DAW that's already a file based. So this is the thing. This is why the Wave stuff does have that kind of ability, because it is designed for a live audio in, audio out streaming platform. Vast majority of plugins we're talking about here are designed to work in a DAW, and that DAW has tracks. Those tracks are technically file based. They're not streaming based. So yeah, so it's more about the life. Back in the day, so as I was talking about with the finalizer, there is a version of the finalizer. You would have to find it secondhand now because they've gone software, but this is what you'd find in a lot of broadcast trucks. Right. So this was the 96, yeah. So this has all the plugins we're all talking about. It does it live at 96. It's a fixed resolution that it does it at, but 9624.
That's so cool. Go ahead, Jason.
I got 2 words for you. Rogue Amoeba. That's right. Audio hijack is just fantastic. It is just bar none exactly what you're talking about.
But be conscious that where we have seen people here have problems with adding plugins that were designed for DAWs go into audio hijack and having the delay issues and breakup issues because they're not designed to work in that environment. So you just need to know whether it's a live plugin or not. Leland?
Obviously, I'm just looking at it from the overall picture of what Scott's trying to do, which is broadcast to Zoom somewhere else. If you're using the virtual camera for any software you're capturing that Zoom with, there really shouldn't be any audio delay. So you may want to look at your audio chain that you've built. One I would recommend right away is either OBS or vMix have the audio delay built into the software. So you can find those under the general audio settings within vMix. And you have to go ahead and dig a little deeper in OBS, but that could obviously be answered in the forums. That's going to be your location to add that delay, not within a plugin.
And from when you're streaming out, the thing to know is you can use these plugins. So Mickey has shown in the past him using plugins in Audio Hijack to the audio version of our show. For the most part, we're experimenting with ice casting, so sometimes it's not that, but generally the audio version of our show sounds better than the YouTube version of our show because it's got some Mickey magic that's been added on the way through before it goes to SoundCloud. Next question.
Stan Chan of Roseville, California says, are there any audio plugins that have an external API control?
I go with Jason.
I'm going to answer your question backwards. Look at TouchOSC at Hexler.net. There are entire apps that are designed to be the API and then let you tie in directly to them, thereby negating the need for a dedicated tool.
Next question.
Marty Atias of Silver Springs, Maryland says, can you discuss the differences and or advantages between the various plugin file formats, VST, 2, 3, AU, AAX, and so forth?
Good, Carl.
Generally these days, it's more of just a transform function. So they're doing the same thing, and it's just the way operating systems and software can transform that particular plugin into that particular DAW. So most plugins are made for all. Some will just choose one or two, but it's like a compiler, you know, essentially an Xcode or something like that. So that's you're compiling for these different ones, and they can choose to compile for all three if they choose to.
And there's not really any, you don't lose any features or gain any features. It's just which applications, and a lot of the applications will see all of them as well. So it's just a matter of which applications will see those. And if your application supports those, it should support the plugins. Next question. Oh, go ahead, Todd, before we go on.
May I go back to Stan Chan's question really quickly? Because that I didn't know, I was kind of having a problem understanding it. All audio plugins can be addressed externally through MIDI control. It depends upon which DAW you're using as to how easily that can happen. So, I mean, what Jason offered with TouchOSC, and also, at least for Ableton Live, something called Touchable, which is an iPad app, all that too. But if you have any kind of external interface, it should be easy to get control over your effects. If you go with something like Native Instruments, of course, they have a whole entire hardware software ecosystem. But I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, very much. Next question.
Gary Harper of London in the UK is next. And Gary's question, this is interesting. If you find a well-recorded and objectively good sounding voice recording, is it viable to use an EQ analyzer and matching tool to get your own recording closer to that source? If so, any plugin recommendations?
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm going to pull a Mickey and say it depends. What matters most is that you pay attention to it and see if you can get it to go where you want it to be so that you can understand how it's adapting. That said, Isotope does a fantastic job of emulating, you know, very simple kind of voiceover stuff. There is an auto learn thing, I think, in the mix tap that Leland was showing off earlier. But again, what matters most is that you understand, you know, where you are and where you want to get.
Good, Carl.
So again, this is something that Finalizer has. This is actually a massive feature of Finalizer that's over the hardware versions. You can actually put in a song, like Stevie Wonder, put it up, it'll analyze the song and tell you like what's happening with the compression on all these different frequencies on, you know, essentially instruments. And then you can put in your mix and it'll actually show you two different graphs. You will be green, I believe there, one is like an amber color, and you can actually get your mix as close as you can to this reference mix. So it's a massive feature. There is a video on the website for Finalizer that tells you all about this feature, about putting up a reference track, they call it. It can be anything but a reference track, and then it will show you the spectrum for that reference track, and then you can actually master your song and it matches that reference track.
Go ahead, Bill. Yeah, you're muted again, Bill. You got to pay closer attention to that little mic.
I'm sorry. I think this is also a values question. When we were watching Todd play on his thing, he was doing a lot of pizzicato strings on his violin. Single note plucked. Could you make that sound like a bass guitar? Yes. With the technology we have, you could do that. Should you? Why would you want to? What's the point of playing a violin to make it sound like a bass when you could play a bass to make it sound like a bass? The capability to do these things is everywhere. The question is, where should you hold back?
I've heard some incredible tools, you know, like using this for that, or playing it backwards, or doing a lot of things. One of the things that I want to play with that I just haven't had the, is it Sanken, I believe, makes one that does 20 to 100K. And I know some sound designers that use that, and I'm dying to do that, where they do it and then they do these huge pitch shifts, and they're grabbing sound that we can't hear, you know, and they're using instruments for, you know, these, it's just kind of an amazing thing. So I think that as we look at it creatively, there's all kinds of things that we do to music or to video that weren't supposed to be done, that creates something new that we can listen to. So I go ahead, Todd.
That's just we used to have MIDI violins back in the day, Bill. And it was it was an IVL pitch writer. And yeah, you could trigger a synthesizer. And every time I heard it done, saw it done, or tried it myself, I said, wow, this is really an awful use of my time, space, and smarts. So yeah, I think it's like skeuomorphia, right? So it's like reproducing things that already exist to try to get kind of close to them is weird. Being creative about it and using an impulse response to completely distort a reverb to make a completely new sound. Amen.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So here's a little secret from sample libraries. So most people who want to get a good cello, they'll actually use a violin sound and down pitch it, because the sample of the violin playing that they've recorded usually has better dynamics and sometimes a better player. And it sounds a lot better when you actually put that down to some cello pieces. He's actually using a violin pitch down.
Todd is like, never.
The cello union is sending you dynamite.
Fenwick even rolled over.
Oh, I love it. The secrets come out. But constrained to the question, I was answering that question with respect to a voice recording, which is what he was asking about. Right. You're not going to sound like James Earl Jones if there is one James Earl Jones, right? You got to understand you're not going to sound different. The voice is an instrument. It's not a plug-in. It's something you learn and you hone, just like a violin.
Go ahead, Leland.
I just had to touch on Bill's little comment because it was so apropos for what honestly Todd is going through right now. We were going to fill the role of a cellist for the remotes band with his violin and tweak it and such, but we went the other route. We decided to call it cellist.
Perfect. Bill.
Well, I just think this is a real interesting. I don't think there's one right answer. I mean, I just think it's useful to struggle with these ideas and decide, where do you lose authenticity? Where do you expand into new things? You have to go both directions. We want to pull the taffy out so there's more possibilities on each end of it. Since he asked specifically about voice, and I do a lot of voice recording as a talent for that, I will say that I wonder if you took Mel Blanc's delivery, and he did all those great Looney Tunes characters, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, all of those, and pitch shifted him down into James Earl Jones's register, it becomes a different thing. So there are pieces of performance that are so magnificent you can't get away from them, no matter how you mess with them. They are there or they're not there. And I do believe that that's true of all artists. I'm not, too afraid of replacing really good people with technology, because really good people always are really good people. They perform.
And I think that when we're using it for something new, it's one thing. When you have something that is, now if you don't have it, like I know a lot of folks that compose ideas by themselves with a synthesizer or with something like that, they're going to put that all together. They know that they're going to go back and have people record all of that. And that's a great way for them to kind of figure this out. Like, how am I going to, this is all going to sound like this, and this, and they can figure out how it's all going to come together. And that's interesting. I think that also that you're coming up with new sounds and new approaches is interesting. When you are just trying to reproduce something that already exists, generally the easiest way to do that is kind of like painting a photograph. It's never quite the same. Now, if you're going to add something creatively to it, a lot of the reason that we moved to this really creative view of our art over the, because the portrait was no longer as important because we had cameras. As we got better at cameras, painting a portrait verbatim was not as interesting as doing something that's more creative. And so I think that it's just a matter of finding that. Anyway, we've reached the end of the hour. It's another great discussion. I wasn't sure if plugins would carry us for an hour. It did. We could probably talk about it all day. I think this group could probably talk about these things all day. Almost any subject we could probably just kind of keep chewing on. So we'll end it here. Great questions from our producers. Excellent work and driving. I just decided we're not going to have any intro. We're not going to go around the horn, because I knew that what would happen is we would lose 30 minutes to us talking about it, which is great, but we were going to talk about our things. I just was like, I know the producers can handle this. And they did. So great questions from the producers, and obviously great answers from the panelists, and great discussion. Thank you once again. And now we're going to either see you tomorrow, or we'll see you in about 30 seconds.